He thought his wife was dead until the new maid looked up and her eyes shattered his world. Why did she hide? And what secret was powerful enough to make a mother vanish from her family for 5 long years? This isn't just a reunion, it's a reckoning. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow, we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The ocean crashed below the cliffs of Julian Blackwell's estate, a constant rhythm that mirrored the ache in his chest. 5 years had passed since Seraphina's body was never recovered from that boating accident, and yet the emptiness hadn't softened. If anything, it had calcified. His staff had dwindled over time, silence. Today, a new maid arrived. Her name was Maria. She was punctual, her uniform crisp, her posture polite. She didn't speak much, only when prompted, and even then her voice barely lifted beyond a whisper. But that wasn't what disturbed him. It was her eyes. They were the exact shade of Seraphina's ocean gray, with gold flecks around the pupil. He caught a glimpse when she looked up to greet him, and it sent a shiver down his spine. The rest of her face was different, her jawline softer, her hair darker, her movements more hesitant, but those eyes, he could not unsee them. He dismissed the thought. Grief, he reasoned, did strange things to a man. He wasn't sleeping well. He hadn't eaten properly in days. Of course she reminded him of Seraphina. Of course his mind, starved for closure, would trick him. Maria kept to herself. She was a shadow in motion, slipping silently through the halls, never in the way. Her work was flawless. Every room she touched gleamed. The silver was polished, the windows spotless, the flowers in the foyer trimmed with care. She never lingered, never made idle conversation, never questioned anything. But there was something in the way she moved, tight, deliberate, almost haunted. Julian began to watch her, not out of suspicion, but confusion. He wanted to understand why every time she turned her head, something inside him braced. Why his chest tightened when she hummed softly under her breath. Always the same notes, familiar yet unplaceable. On the 3rd day, he caught her staring at the ocean from the balcony near the west wing. She didn't hear his footsteps. Her shoulders were hunched, and her fingers clutched the railing like she was holding back a scream. He almost called her name. But which name? Maria, he said instead, low and measured. She jolted, turning quickly. Her face was composed in a second, but her eyes, those traitorous eyes, widened with fear before shuddering again. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured. "I didn't mean to intrude." Julian said nothing. He simply nodded and walked away. But his thoughts wouldn't. That night, he drank scotch alone in the study, the fire crackling as he sat staring at a faded photograph of Seraphina. She was laughing in the picture, wind in her hair, eyes dancing. The same eyes now moved silently through his house. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in memories, and sometimes they haunted worse than spirits. Just after midnight, a sound tugged him from sleep. A soft melody drifting through the hallway, gentle, aching, full of something almost like sorrow. A lullaby. It's not just any lullaby. Seraphina's lullaby. Julian pushed back the covers and stepped out barefoot onto the cold floor. He followed the music down the hall, past the staircase, into the kitchen. The humming stopped. The kitchen was empty, save for the soft glow above the sink. There, standing alone in the quiet, was Maria. She hadn't heard him enter. Her back was to him, her hand under the faucet. A plate slipped from her grip, a jagged line split through the porcelain. She gasped softly. Julian stepped forward, but her shoulders went rigid. Slowly she turned around, the broken plate in her palm, water trickling down her wrist. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Julian stared at her, at the woman who called herself Maria but stood like someone else. Someone he had once held at night, someone whose laugh still echoed in the corners of this house. "You're bleeding," he said softly, gesturing to her hand. She looked down at the small cut on her palm, as if she hadn't noticed. "It's nothing," she whispered. "I'll take care of it." Julian took a step forward. "You knew that song." Maria's breath hitched. "It's an old lullaby. My mother used to sing it." "That's a lie," he said, not with anger but certainty. "Seraphina's mother wrote that lullaby. No one outside our family would know it." She said nothing. "I'm not mad," he added. "I just need to know who you are." She turned toward the sink, rinsing the plate as if nothing had been said, but her hands trembled. Water dripped down her sleeve. "You look like her," Julian continued, his voice thick. "But you're not her. She died. I watched the Coast Guard pull pieces of our boat from the bay." "And not her," Maria said quickly. "Please, don't say that again." "Then why do I feel like I already know you?" he whispered. She shook her head and backed away, pressing the towel to her palm. "I'm just a maid, that's all." But even as she said it, Julian could hear the crack in her voice, like something barely stitched together coming undone. He didn't press her further, not that night. The next day, she worked as usual, silent and careful. But Julian couldn't shake the image of her standing in the kitchen with that lullaby on her lips. Every time their paths crossed, he found himself searching her face for something familiar. A twitch of her mouth, the curve of her cheek, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. All of it was Seraphina, and none of it. A week passed. Julian called the agency that sent her. "We don't have a maid named Maria on assignment at your property," the receptionist said, after a long pause. "Are you sure she came from us?" He hung up without answering. That night, he sat at the grand piano in the main parlor, something he hadn't touched in years. His fingers hesitated over the keys. The first note was shaky, the second, slowly, he played the lullaby, Seraphina's lullaby. The room was dark except for the faint moonlight seeping in through the glass doors. He didn't hear her come in. But she stood there, just beyond the edge of light, her hands folded in front of her. Julian kept playing. When the last note faded, he turned. "Who are you?" he asked again. "Really?" Maria's lip quivered, her eyes glistened, and for the first time she took a step toward him. Not as a maid, but as someone who'd been running far too long. "He's someone who once had everything," she said, her voice barely audible, "and lost it in one terrible night." Julian stood slowly. Their eyes locked again, and she whispered, "You buried a memory, but I buried myself." The room fell silent. Outside, the sea crashed against the rocks, as if echoing the moment two truths, long hidden, finally began to surface. The sun was barely up when Julian entered his study, expecting silence. Instead, he froze at the sight of something foreign on his desk. A framed photo he hadn't seen in years. Their wedding photo. Only something was wrong. Her face, Seraphina's, had been scratched out, violently, except for the eyes. Those unmistakable eyes that still haunted him. He picked up the frame, his fingers trembling. Who had left this? It wasn't there the night before. The staff didn't have access to his office. The door had been locked. He stormed out, the frame still in his hand. In the kitchen, Maria was wiping down the counter, her motions rhythmic and controlled, until she saw what he held. Her hands stopped mid-swipe. A breath caught. "Where did you get this?" he asked, holding it up. Her gaze dropped instantly. "I don't know. I've never seen it." "Don't lie to me," Julian said, his voice low and strained. "Why would this show up now?" "This. I don't know," she repeated, but it sounded rehearsed, hollow. He stepped closer. "Have we met before?" She said quickly, then paused. "Maybe you think we have. Grief can—" He cut her off. "Don't tell me what grief can do." Before she could answer, something slipped from her coat pocket, an innocent piece of folded paper. It fluttered to the floor near his feet. Julian bent and picked it up. It was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures, a tall man, a small child, and a woman with long black hair and blue eyes. The words beneath it were written in a shaky hand. "My family." Julian stared at it, speechless. The man looked like him, The woman, like Seraphina. "Whose is this?" he asked. Maria remained still, too still. "I think you should go," she whispered. "I think you owe me the truth," he replied. But she didn't answer. She turned and left the room without another word, her shoulders stiff, her steps quick and silent. That night, Julian didn't sleep. Instead, he poured himself a glass of scotch and sat in the parlor, watching the fire flicker. He stared at the scratched photo, then at the drawing, unable to reconcile what they meant. The woman in his house, who moved like Seraphina, who hummed like her, who panicked when she dropped a child's drawing, wasn't just a stranger with familiar eyes. She was something else. Someone else. And suddenly, memories came flooding back. That boating accident 5 years ago. The explosion. The weeks afterward, combing every cove and rocky beach, demanding answers from the Coast Guard, the divers, the rescue teams, and then, nothing. No body, no proof, just silent. He'd never stopped looking. But they told him there was no hope. The next morning, Maria didn't show up to clean the study. She didn't come to the kitchen. By mid-afternoon, Julian searched the staff quarters. Her room was empty, neatly made, no personal belongings. It was like she had never been there. But on the bedside table, he found a worn, brown journal. He hesitated, then opened it. The first page read, in careful script, "To remember my name, but I dream of the ocean, of hands I once held, of love I fear I lost. Until I know who I am, I will be known as Maria." His heart twisted. He sat down heavily on the bed and flipped through the pages. Scribbled dates, thoughts, flashes of memory. Then, halfway through, the writing changed. "Remember now, my name was Seraphina. I had a husband, a life, but when I came back, I saw the headlines. He declared me dead. Moved on. Maybe it's better this way." Julian's hand tightened around the journal. He had never moved on. Julian sat frozen on the edge of the empty bed, his thumb tracing the faded ink across the journal's page. Every word Seraphina had written felt like a ghost brushing past his skin, a wound reopening not from pain but recognition. She had been alive all this time, and she thought he had given up. Hadn't. He flipped through more pages. Some entries were confused, others desperate. She'd been found by a fisherman, taken in by a quiet coastal village with no access to national news. The trauma from the explosion had left her disoriented, unable to speak for weeks. Slowly, her voice had returned, not her past. The name Maria had come from the nurse who cared for her. And in the stillness of that life, Seraphina vanished, replaced by someone who learned to scrub floors and sweep silence into corners. Until one day, she remembered everything. And instead of returning, she watched, waited, found the truth in newspaper clippings. Julian had declared her dead. The world had mourned her. There was a new board of directors, new women photographed beside him at charity galas. None of them lasted. None of them mattered. Julian hadn't remarried. He'd searched quietly, obsessively. But when rescue teams confirmed no survivors, he'd been forced to stop. The declaration of death had been legal, formal, empty. But Seraphina hadn't known that. The next entry in the journal was marked by a tear stain. "I stood outside his gate once. I couldn't go in. I thought, what if he moved on? What if I bring more pain than peace? What if the secret that destroyed us once destroys him again?" Julian closed the journal with a shaking breath. He knew the secret she meant. Years before the accident, they had been trying for a child. There had been complications, a pregnancy, a miscarriage, a fracture between them neither had learned to mend before the accident happened. Seraphina had grieved alone, while Julian buried himself in work. They had grown distant, but not loveless. He understood now. She wasn't hiding because she stopped loving him. She was hiding because she still did. And she didn't want her presence to reopen wounds he'd worked so hard to close. Julian rose abruptly and left the room. The staff barely noticed him as he moved through the house. His eyes scanned every hallway, every corner, until he reached the security room tucked behind the west wing, a place no one but him accessed. He brought up the surveillance feed. 4 cameras had been quietly installed days ago, pointed toward the kitchen, the back staircase, the maid's entrance, and the greenhouse. He hesitated, feeling guilt press against his ribs, but there she was. Maria Seraphina, caught in the glow of the moonlight in the greenhouse, touching a single blooming lily, her head bowed. She looked tired, as if the weight of remembering had made her old overnight, as if knowing what she had left behind now burdened her more than the loss itself. He watched her whisper something, then tuck a photograph into the soil near the flower pot. Julian rewound the feed, paused, zoomed. It was a picture of them, him and Seraphina, on their honeymoon, standing by the ocean. The edges were worn, but the image was unmistakable. She had never let it go. He stared at the screen, then slowly leaned back in his chair. This wasn't grief playing tricks. It was her. Live, near, and broken all over again. But this time, he wouldn't let her run. This time, he would ask the one question he hadn't dared before. "Won't you come home?" And maybe, just maybe, she'd finally be ready to answer it. Julian stepped out onto the veranda, the morning sun just beginning to warm the damp stone beneath his bare feet. A movement caught his eye in the garden, small, darting, too graceful to be an animal. His brows knit as he stepped closer. A little girl was tiptoeing among the roses, cradling a wilted bloom in her hand. Around 5 years old, curly dark hair tied back with a pink ribbon, and a face that made something inside him clench unexpectedly. She bent down, whispering softly to the petals, as if they could hear her. Then she looked up and saw him. For a frozen moment, their eyes locked. Then the girl's face lit with innocent joy. "Mama," she called toward the kitchen door behind him. "He's here." Julian turned slowly. Maria, no, Seraphina, stood there, frozen in the doorway, pale and trembling. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Julian's gaze snapped back to the child. "Who is she?" he asked, voice low but sharp. Maria hesitated. She's Clara," she said softly, stepping down the stone stairs. "My daughter." "Your daughter," Julian's voice cracked. "How old is she?" Five. The number struck him like a bell in a cathedral. 5 years since Seraphina died. 5 years since the boat exploded. 5 years since the ocean stole everything from him. He took a step back, reeling. "You had a child? While His voice died in his throat. He stared at Maria, then at Clara, then back again. The resemblance was undeniable now. The shape of her chin, the curve of her lashes, even the way she stood, defiant and poised. "Have you lost your mind?" he whispered. "You let me grieve all this time, thinking you were dead, while He couldn't even finish the sentence. Maria knelt beside Clara, brushing a leaf from her dress. "Clara, sweetheart, go inside. I'll be right there." Clara looked up at Julian, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. "Mama said you're nice." Julian's heart twisted. "No," he said quickly, almost in a whisper. "No, I'm not mad at you." Clara lingered for a moment before shuffling quietly inside. Julian turned to Maria, jaw tight. "You're going to explain this, right now." Maria folded her arms across her chest. "There's nothing to explain that you'd believe. Try me. I was pregnant when the boat exploded," she said. "I didn't know it until weeks later. I had no memory of anything. Not my name, not you, not even what city I was from. A fisherman pulled me from the wreckage. He took me in, called me Maria." "When did you get your memory back?" Julia demanded. 2 years ago," she whispered. 2 years, his voice cracked. "And you still didn't come back?" Died for a moment. "I thought you moved on, that you'd remarried, that you'd made peace. I read things, saw articles, and I was scared, Julian. Scared you'd hate me." Julian shook his head slowly. "You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't get to keep my child from me." Silence stretched between them, taut and bitter. "You want a DNA test," he said. Maria's face didn't flinch. "Fine. Today." She nodded. "But if it's true, if Clara is yours, will you at least listen to the rest? Because there's more, Julian. Things you don't know. Things that broke me." He didn't answer. He simply turned and walked toward the house, leaving Maria standing alone, staring at the rose Clara had dropped at her feet. Julian stood in his private study, staring blankly at the envelope on his desk. Inside it lay the results. DNA confirmation. No margin of doubt. Clara was his daughter. He hadn't opened it in front of Maria. He hadn't needed to. The moment he'd seen Clara's eyes in that garden, part of him had already known. But the paper made it real. Legally, scientifically, inarguably real. A daughter. A daughter he'd missed 5 years of bedtime stories, first steps, scraped knees, and lullabies with. And all because Seraphina, Maria, had disappeared, returned, and hidden in plain sight. The knock at the door came hesitantly. Julian turned. "Come in." Maria stepped inside. Her hands were clasped, her hair pulled back tightly like she was bracing herself for battle. "Did you get the results?" He didn't answer with words. He just handed her the opened envelope. She glanced at it, then lowered her head. "I never planned for it to happen like this," she said. "I swear to you." Julian's voice was low and strained. "I grieved you. I mourned you. I lit candles on every anniversary and stared at that ocean and wondered what I could have done differently. I would have died for you, Seraphina, and while I was burying myself in guilt, you were alive. You had and remembering you," she said again, her voice breaking. "When I finally did, I was scared of what coming back might do. To you, to her, to everything. And I didn't think I was ready to face what we left behind." Julian's gaze hardened. "What did we leave behind?" Her lips trembled. "You really don't remember, do you?" He paused. "What are you talking about?" But she shook her head and stepped back. "Not yet," she murmured. "You're not ready to hear it." He walked past her without a word. Later that night, Julian stood in the hallway outside Clara's temporary room. He'd told Maria she and Clara could stay in the guest wing for now. Not forever. Not yet. He heard a soft voice from inside. "Mama, why is he so sad?" Maria's voice followed, gentle but tired. "Because sometimes the heart forgets how to hope." "Did I make him mad?" "No, sweetheart," she said quickly. "You didn't do anything wrong." There was silence. Then Clara's tiny voice asked, "Is he my daddy?" Julian couldn't breathe. Maria whispered, "He is." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Julian stepped away from the door. He didn't know if he was angry or grieving all over again. But one thing was clear. Clara wasn't at fault. She was the innocent piece of a broken puzzle, born into a silence that had festered too long. The next morning, Clara was in the garden again, sitting on a small bench with a book too large for her lap. When Julian approached, she looked up nervously. "Hi," she said. He nodded. "Hi." She hesitated. "Do you not like me?" He knelt in front of her, heart heavy. "Clara, I don't know how to be a dad yet, but I want to try." His eyes lit up. "Really?" He nodded. "Really." She leaned forward and hugged him around the neck without waiting for permission. Julian froze for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if afraid she might vanish like a dream. Behind them, Maria stood at the kitchen window, tears in her eyes and trembling hands resting on the sink. She had wanted to protect both of them from pain, but perhaps some wounds had to break open before healing could begin. And this time, she wouldn't run. The wind howled like a wounded animal as the storm rolled in off the sea, slamming against the windows of the mansion with a force that rattled the glass. Rain lashed the coastline, turning the garden into a blur of shadows and trembling trees. When the power went out, the house fell into sudden silence, save for the rhythmic beat of water and the distant roll of... Julian stood in the dim hallway, holding a flashlight in one hand. His other hand trembled slightly, but he masked it behind his usual cool demeanor. Clara clung to Maria's skirt, her eyes wide. "Mama, is it safe?" Maria knelt to her daughter's level and smoothed the wet hair from her forehead. "Yes, baby, the storm will pass. We're just going to stay inside, all right?" Julian's voice cut through the dark. "We'll light the fireplace in the main parlor. It's the safest room." The three moved together, strangely quiet, as if the storm outside demanded reverence. In the flickering light of the hearth, Clara curled into a wool blanket on the rug, her little hands clutching her stuffed bear. Maria eased down beside her, humming softly, the same melody Seraphina used to sing on sleepless nights. Julian recognized it instantly, and for a long moment the memories came back in vivid color. His late wife's laughter by candlelight, her fingers stained with garden soil, the way she used to hum when folding laundry, when nothing needed fixing but everything needed love. He sat opposite them, his elbows resting on his knees, watching. Clara glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Can we play a game? Mama says games help when storms are scary." Julian nodded. "What kind of game?" "Tell me about it," Clara said brightly. "You go first, Mr. Julian." His breath caught. "All right." He looked into the fire. "I remember. The summer Seraphina made me plant sunflowers in the backyard. I hated dirt, but she said it would make me human again." Maria's shoulders tensed. She flattened her face. "Remember she wore this ridiculous hat? Straw, with a bow. She looked like a child pretending to be a farmer," he added, almost smiling. Clara giggled. "Mama has a hat like that?" Julian looked at Maria. She lowered her gaze. "You next," Clara said, nudging her mother. Maria hesitated, then spoke slowly. "I remember a man who was too busy to eat breakfast, but always noticed when my smile was forced. I remember thinking, if I ever got to come home again, I'd want him to see me, not pass me by." Julian didn't interrupt. He only watched her. They sat in silence after that. Long, weighted silence, punctuated by thunder and the crackling fire. Then Clara dozed off, her breathing steady, curled in a nest of warmth between them. Julian leaned forward, his voice low. "Why did you disappear?" Maria didn't answer right away. She stared into the flames as if trying to find the words in their flicker. "Because before the accident, I found something. I was researching your company's subsidiaries for a nonprofit audit. I discovered a biotech firm you'd unknowingly funded, and they were testing on vulnerable people. Without consent." Julian's eyes narrowed. "I didn't know." "Leave you," she whispered, "now. But back then, I was going to tell you, I was going to expose it, and then the explosion happened." He was quiet for a long time. "If you thought I was behind it." Maria nodded slowly. "For years I wasn't sure." Julian stood, the weight of betrayal and the ache of clarity crashing over him at once. He turned to Clara, who shifted in her sleep and mumbled something that sounded like, "Papa." He knelt beside her, Rasta trembling hand on her small shoulder. The storm outside showed no sign of ending, but something inside them had shifted. The fire burned lower, casting long shadows across the parlor walls. Maria wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, her eyes never leaving Clara's peaceful face. Julian stood near the window, watching the storm but seeing something else entirely. Fragments of a life he thought he'd buried. Behind him, Maria spoke softly, her voice barely audible above the wind. Scared Julian. When I started remembering who I was, remembering you, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to come back immediately, but the other part kept whispering that maybe I was the reason the boat exploded, that maybe someone wanted me gone. He turned toward her slowly. "You thought I had a reason to..." She cut in. "Not you, not truly, but your company, the people I threatened to expose. I didn't know how deep it went. I was just a law school dropout with a cause. They had power. I thought I was protecting Clara by staying gone." Julian's voice was hushed but firm. "You weren't a dropout. You were a whistleblower, and if someone tried to silence you, they failed." Maria nodded, blinking fast. "Still, I never thought I'd see you again, until I got the job here. I didn't plan it. I didn't even know it was your house until I saw the name on the mailbox. I froze, but then I saw Clara playing in the garden, happy, safe, and I thought, maybe Maybe I could just keep cleaning, keep quiet, not disturb anything. Clara wandered into the garden, Julian murmured, and said the word that shattered everything. She smiled faintly. She's never been good at keeping secrets. Julian looked down at Clara. She called me Papa in her sleep tonight. Always has, Maria whispered. Even when she didn't know your name. She's always asked about the man from her dreams. A log popped in the fireplace, sending a brief flare of sparks into the room. Julian slowly walked toward Maria. He knelt down beside the couch, resting one hand on the armrest, the other hanging loosely at his side. I can't undo the pain, he said, voice ragged. I can't reclaim the years I lost with you, with her, but I need to know, are you still her, the woman who built sunflowers into my soul? Maria's eyes welled. She reached up and gently touched the side of his face, like she was reminding her fingers of something they used to know. I'm her, a little older, a little more scarred, but still her. Julian didn't move. He just leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. A quiet moment passed, then he whispered, I should have never stopped looking. You didn't, she replied. You just didn't know where to look. Clara stirred then, sitting up slowly. Mama? Papa? They both looked at her. Julian opened his arms. Come here. She ran to him, curling into his lap. He kissed the top of her head. Outside, the storm began to ease. The wind softened, the pounding rain slowed to a whisper. Maria watched them. Father and daughter reunited, not in a courtroom, not in revenge or spectacle, but in warmth, in firelight, in silence, in the moment that mattered. Julian looked up at her again. No more running. More secrets, she added. He nodded. Maria walked over and sat beside them. Clara giggled, squirming between them, holding one hand in each of theirs. I like the storm, she said sleepily. It made us all stay. Julian looked at Maria. It brought you home. Maria squeezed his hand. I think I was always coming back. I just didn't know how. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The next morning, Julian sat alone in his private study, the early light bleeding in through the floor-length windows, casting long shadows across the files spread out before him. The air was thick with unspoken truths, but now there was no more room for denial. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the last folder, the one Damien had sealed years ago under a fabricated division name. And there it was, his brother's signature on multiple authorizations for funding a biotech firm later implicated in human trials. Without consent. The research wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Julian exhaled hard and slammed the folder shut. The betrayal clawed at his chest. Not only had Damien hidden it from the board and regulators, he'd let Seraphina take the fall. Julian's mind reeled back to the days after her disappearance, the legal firestorm, the media frenzy, the corporate spin. And all along, Damien had smiled in his. By 10 a.m., Julian was inside the towering, glass building of Blackwell Industries, stepping into the executive boardroom. Damien was already there, surrounded by smug-faced shareholders who thought today's meeting was about quarterly earnings. Julian, however, had other plans. Good morning, Julian began, his voice calm but cold. Before we begin today's agenda, I'd like to address something that should have been dealt with a long time ago. Damien looked up, flashing a charming grin. Juliet, if this is about the restructuring, it's about the truth, Julian cut in. The truth you buried under division codes and silence. Diffused murmurs swept the room. Julian opened the leather folder and pulled out a USB stick. 5 years ago, my wife, Seraphina Blackwell, uncovered evidence that one of our subsidiaries was involved in illegal biomedical testing. She intended to report it. Days later, she was presumed dead in a boating explosion. I now know that wasn't an accident. Damien chuckled, but there was a tension in his jaw. Julian, you sound unwell. Let's step outside. We're doing this here. He inserted the USB into the console at the center of the table. A voice filled the room. Damien's voice, unmistakably clear and cocky. She's too close. If she exposes the division, we're finished. I don't care how it happens, just make sure she disappears before she gets to the board." Gasps echoed through the room. A board member stood in disbelief. "Is this real?" Julian turned to him. "Maria, formerly Seraphina, secretly recorded that years ago. It's been authenticated." Damien's face turned gray. "You don't understand. I did it to protect the company." "You did it to protect yourself," Julian replied. "You used my grief, manipulated the board, and nearly destroyed a woman who was trying to do the right thing." Damien stood, seething. "You think they'll believe her over me?" Julia said, nodding toward the two legal officers at the door. "Your resignation is expected by end of day. If not, formal charges will be filed. With this evidence and the board's vote, you're done." Damien looked around. No one met his eyes. One by one, heads lowered or turned away. Julian stood tall. "I may have been blind then, but I won't be complicit now." Without another word, Damien stormed out. Silence held the room for a moment. Then someone clapped. A few others followed, but Julian didn't care about applause. He only wanted one thing: to go home. Home. That word hadn't meant anything for years. Now it did. Julian returned to the mansion long after the sun had set. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled like salt and secrets. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his eyes looked hollow from the confrontation. As he stepped inside, the house was quiet. Then he saw her. Maria stood by the grand staircase, suitcase by her side. Clara's tiny backpack sat atop it. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers were clenched, knuckles white. "You found the truth," she said softly, not looking at him. Julian's throat tightened. "I did." She nodded once, then glanced down. "Then there's no reason for us to stay." He stepped forward. "That's not what I want." "It doesn't matter what you want," she whispered, her voice fraying. "You have your company. You have your answers. You don't need the woman who once doubted you, who ran instead of trusting you." Julian moved closer, slowly, as if afraid she might vanish again. "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be here." Maria's eyes watered. "Julian, You didn't just survive," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "You protected Clara. You raised her when I thought she didn't even exist. You gave her a chance when I had nothing left." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I was going to tell you one day, but every day that passed, it got harder, and when I saw you again, I was terrified." "Of what?" he asked gently. "You wouldn't believe me, that you'd see me and only think of the lie." He took another step, now standing right in front of her. "I saw the lie. I saw the silence, but I also saw the lullaby you sang in the kitchen. The way Clara smiles when she sees you. The way you still tuck your hair behind your ear when you're nervous." Maria's lips parted slightly. "You noticed?" She looked toward the door, then back at him. "So, what now?" Julian knelt to unzip Clara's backpack. He pulled out a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures, one tall man with brown hair, one woman with long black curls, and between them, a small girl with big eyes and a crooked smile. Above them, Clara had written one word in big, bold letters: "Hope." Julian handed the drawing to Maria. "She knows what she wants. Do you?" Maria stared at the paper, her breath hitching. "I want to believe this can work." "Then stay," Julian said softly. "Not because I asked, not because of the past. Stay because we're here, because Clara deserves to grow up in a home built on truth this time." Maria hesitated, then slowly she picked up Clara's backpack and set it on the floor beside her. Clara's sleepy voice echoed from the hallway. "Marma, are we going again?" Maria turned. "No, baby," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're staying." Clara ran into Julian's arms and hugged him tight. "Daddy, you're not mad anymore?" Julian kissed her forehead. "Never at you, sweetheart. I'm just happy you're here." He looked up at Maria. No longer a shadow, no longer a lie. Just Seraphina. Just the woman he'd loved, lost, and now found again. For the first time in 5 years, the mansion felt warm. And for the first time in forever, No one was running. Julian had never been more nervous hosting a dinner in his own home. The long oak table was set with care, candles flickering in the chandelier's glow. Across from him sat Maria and Clara, both dressed in soft pastels. Maria's hair was pinned like Seraphina once wore it, simple, elegant. Clara swung her legs beneath the table, eyes darting between the grown-ups. But it wasn't Clara who made Julian's heart race. It was the woman to his right, Eleanor Blackwell, his mother. Eleanor's gaze hadn't left Maria since she arrived. The older woman's fingers gripped the stem of her wine glass, unmoving, as if afraid a single breath might crack the illusion. "You remind me so much of someone I once loved dearly," Eleanor finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria smiled politely. "I get that sometimes." Eleanor said more firmly, "Not like this." Julian cleared his throat. "Mother?" But Eleanor had already turned to Maria, eyes gleaming. "Your voice, your posture, even the way you butter your bread. That's not coincidence. That's blood memory. My dear, you are her, aren't you?" Maria set her knife down. Silence filled the room. Clara looked between them. "Grandma?" Julian reached for Maria's hand. She hesitated, then gave it. Her eyes shimmered. "I am Seraphina," she whispered. "I never meant to keep it from you. I just didn't know if I'd be welcome again." Eleanor rose from her seat. For a moment, Julian feared anger, but instead, she walked slowly toward Maria and placed both hands on her cheeks. "Son may have declared you dead," she said, tears sliding down her face, "but a mother's heart never did." Maria broke. She stood, and they embraced, Eleanor clutching her as if to reclaim 5 years of grief. After dinner, Clara showed Julian a folded piece of paper she'd been hiding behind her back all evening. "Point made for you." Gently, she pressed his palm. "It's from both of us." He unfolded it. A drawing of 3 stick figures, Clara in the middle, Maria on one side, Juliet on the other, stood beneath a red heart. Beneath it, in shaky but determined handwriting, "To Daddy, from Mama and me." His breath caught. Clara looked up. "Is it okay if I call you that? I know I'm not supposed to." Julian scooped her into his arms, holding her tight. "It's more than okay." Later that night, with the house quiet and Clara tucked into bed, Julian led Maria out into the garden. The moon was high, its light casting silver onto the garden path. They stopped beneath the old cherry tree, the one where Julian had proposed years ago, before the world came undone. He turned to her, no velvet box in hand. Instead, he pulled a thick leather-bound journal from behind his back. Its spine was worn, its pages dog-eared and scribbled with his past. Phoebe's heart felt with suddenly. She asked, "I wrote to you," he said, "after the accident. Every month. Letters I never sent. Pages I never thought you'd read. But I never stopped talking to you." He opened it, letting her see her name written again and again. "Seraphina, today Clara took her first steps. Seraphina, I miss the sound of your laugh. Seraphina, I still love you. I don't know how to stop." Her hands trembled as she took the journal. Each page was a bridge across 5 years of silence. Tears streaked her cheeks. "You remembered me," she whispered. She never forgot. Maria clutched the journal to her chest, as if it were a piece of her past she didn't know she was allowed to reclaim. The wind whispered through the branches above them, and Julian stepped closer. "I didn't bring a ring," he said quietly, "because this time, I didn't want to make a promise I didn't understand. I just want to make a choice, with you, not for the past, for the future." Maria looked up at him, her lips parted, but no words came, only emotion, only breath. "Julian," she finally whispered, "I laughed because I didn't know if I belonged in your world anymore. I was scared, of what I knew, of what I didn't, of what had changed in you, in me." He nodded. "You're right. Everything changed, but one thing didn't. I never stopped waiting for you. Even when I thought you were gone, I was still writing to someone who lived in my soul." She reached for his hand, their fingers interlocking with an intimacy both familiar and new. The garden lights above them flickered, as the wind danced between their silhouettes. Her heart, once buried beneath years of doubt and fear, now thudded loudly in her chest. "Yes," she said. Julian blinked. "Yes?" Maria laughed softly. "Yes, Julian Blackwell. Not because I owe you anything, not because I pity our pain, but because I choose you. Not for who we were, but for who we are now. I choose us this strange, beautiful second beginning." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if to promise without speaking that he would never let go again. They kissed under the same cherry tree that had once heard their first vows, the bark, still bearing the initials he'd carved years ago. Blas felt like it had been waiting, too. From the balcony above, a sleepy voice called out, "Mama? Daddy?" They looked up to see Clara, her small frame wrapped in a blanket, watching them with wide eyes. Maria reached her hand toward her. "Come here, sweetheart." Clara padded down the steps barefoot, curls bouncing, and ran straight into their embrace. Julian lifted her gently and held her between them. The three stood together beneath the moonlight, no longer divided by grief or time, no longer fractured by what had been lost. That weekend, they invited only a handful of close friends and family to a quiet ceremony on the lawn. Eleanor wept as she placed a simple crown of lilies in her daughter-in-law's hair. Marisol, standing to the side, clasped her hands and whispered, "You didn't just survive, Sarah, you rose." The aisle was lined with white garden roses, and at the end stood Julian, waiting not with fanfare, but with the steadiness of a man who had loved through silence, storm, and memory. Clara, in a soft blue dress, walked ahead of her mother, holding a bouquet she had made herself. As Maria Elgora-Finity walked toward Julian, there was no music, only the soft rush of the ocean beyond the cliffs, and the sound of hearts steadying themselves. They spoke their vows not with grandeur, but with truth. Julian looked into her eyes and said, "No more secrets, no more shadows, only light." Seraphina replied, "I will not disappear again. I am home." They sealed it with a kiss that didn't erase the past but honored it, a kiss that knew grief, guilt, longing, and still chose love. That night, under string lights and stars, they danced slowly, barefoot on the grass, Clara giggling between them. For the first time in 5 years, Julian didn't feel haunted. He felt whole. And Seraphina, no longer hiding, no longer silent, smiled with a peace she hadn't known since the sea tried to take her. The waves whispered gently along the shore as the sun began its descent, casting golden light across the secluded cove. White chairs lined the sand, delicate fabric swaying in the breeze. It wasn't grand, it wasn't lavish, but it was perfect. For them. Maria stood barefoot on the edge of the aisle, her hand held tightly by Clara, who wore a flower crown she'd made herself. The child beamed, tugging gently at her mother's dress. Maria took a breath, heart pounding beneath layers of silk. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a resurrection, not of Seraphina, not of Maria, but of a soul that had survived fire, silence, and secrets. As she began walking, eyes lifted toward the man waiting at the altar, her vision blurred. Julian stood still, but the ocean behind him roared like thunder in her chest. He held something in his hands, old, delicate. As she stepped closer, she realized what it was. Their wedding photo. Tattered at the edges, the colors faded from years of holding and remembering. But on the back, new ink danced across the surface. His vows, written not in haste, but over the course of years. A love letter, rebuilt word by word while believing she was gone. Julian took her hand as she reached him, his voice trembled. "I wrote this the first time I thought I'd never see you again. Then the second, and then the 100th. But today, I want you to hear it not as memory, but as promise." He turned the photo and read softly, "You once said love was not loud, it was steady, it waited, it endured, and when the sea tried to silence you, I listened harder. I loved you then, I love you now, and I vow to never forget the quiet that saved me." Gasps from the small gathering rippled behind them. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. Maria held his gaze, chest rising with each shaky breath. Then she reached into her bouquet and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. She began her vows, not in English, but in Spanish, her mother tongue. Her voice carried over the surf, soft but certain. Megalausi, una vez amaste sucir, hoy te entrego a Maria, ambas soy yo. You once loved Seraphina, today I give you Maria, both are me. Came back, not to be who I was, but to be all of who I am. I vow not just to walk beside you, but to stand for what we now know, for what we nearly lost. Julian's eyes never left hers. Clara clapped wildly before anyone else, giggling with innocent joy. "Yay, Mama!" she cried, wrapping her arms around both of them. Laughter broke the moment, but it made it all the more real. The past was honored, but the future was finally free to begin. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Julian didn't wait. He pulled her into a kiss that was reverent, not desperate. A kiss that didn't need to prove survival, only devotion. The first dance followed soon after. A small record player crackled to life. The song? That lullaby. The one Seraphina had once hummed in the kitchen, long before memory vanished. The same melody Maria had unknowingly brought back. He led her gently, Clara swaying between their legs. The breeze curled around them like a blessing. But the night was far from over. Later that evening, beneath the soft hum of string lights woven through the trees, the guests gathered at the edge of the lawn where a wooden podium stood. A large canvas banner hung behind it, the Seraphina Foundation for Truth and Justice. Julian had kept it secret until tonight. Maria's name wasn't just on the wedding announcement, it was carved into legacy. Julian stepped forward, holding Clara in his arms. "This foundation," he began, voice steady but brimming with quiet emotion, "is in honor of the woman who never stopped fighting, even when the world tried to silence her. A woman who taught me that survival is only half the battle. The rest is what we do with our voice." He looked over at Maria, his wife, his storm, his redemption. She lost everything, her name, her future, her safety, but she never lost her will to protect those who had less. Tonight, that will becomes something greater. Applause rang out gently across the lawn. Maria stepped forward, alone now, no longer Seraphina hiding in a maid's apron, no longer Maria haunted by fear, just a woman standing before truth. And speaking it. Her hands didn't shake. "I used to believe my story ended in the fire," she said, voice calm, eyes wide open. "That when the boat exploded, everything I was died with it. But I was wrong. The fire didn't end me, it forged me." Clara sat on the grass nearby, playing with petals from a bouquet. Julian watched silently from the edge of the stage, hands clasped, jaw tight. "I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for justice. Not just for me, but for every woman who was told to disappear, every worker whose silence was purchased, every mother who feared being found more than being forgotten." The guests were still, not even the wind dared interrupt her. "I didn't find myself through the love of a man. Though I am loved, I found myself through the pain I thought would drown me, and I rose, not because I was rescued, but because truth, once buried, always claws its way back to the surface." A pause, then her voice softened. "Several of you knew me as Seraphina. Others met me as Maria, but today I am both. And I speak not as a ghost of the past, but as the voice of the future." A standing ovation began with Marisol, wiping away tears, and spread slowly through the crowd. As the evening faded into stars, Clara wandered over to the newly placed foundation plaque at the garden's edge. She bent down and pressed her hand against the polished surface. Julia and Maria followed, arms around each other. The plaque read, "In honor of the woman who chose truth over silence, the Seraphina Foundation. Founded by Julian and Maria Blackwell." Clara pointed up at the words, her eyes wide. "Mama, that's your real name." Maria crouched beside her daughter. "It is, mi amor." Julian knelt beside them. "And now, it's written where it belongs." Clara tilted her head. "So, can I call you Mommy Seraphina now?" Maria laughed through tears. "You can call me whatever feels like home." Julian wrapped his arms around them both as a warm breeze lifted from the sea. This wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of a family built not on illusion but truth, spoken aloud with nothing left in the shadows. The morning sun poured through the windows of the coastal home, casting soft golden light on the breakfast table where Clara sat cross-legged, coloring a drawing titled, "My Family." Her handwriting had improved, each letter of Blackwell proudly scrawled across the bottom in rainbow ink. Across from her, Seraphina Maria Blackwell, no longer Maria the maid, no longer a woman in hiding, reviewed speaking notes. She was different now. Not just in name, but in presence. She stood taller, spoke without hesitation, and no longer flinched when people addressed her directly. Running the Blackwell Foundation for Corporate Accountability had given her more than a career. It had given her a voice. A real one, the kind they tried to silence years ago. Julian entered the room with 2 mugs of tea, one in each hand, and a kiss pressed gently to her cheek. His suit jacket hung open, tie undone. He'd stepped back from his company months ago, exchanging power for purpose. He now spent most of his time lecturing on ethics to young CEOs at business schools across the country. "Speech ready?" he asked, sliding her mug toward her. She nodded, almost, just debating the last line. Clara looked up from her drawing. "Is it the part about your name again?" Seraphina smiled. "It is." "Then say it," Clara urged, reaching over to squeeze her mother's hand. "Say your whole name. Like you taught me." Seraphina inhaled, held it, then slowly exhaled. "Seraphina Maria Blackwell." Clara beamed. "See? Perfect." Later that day, the Blackwells hosted a formal donor dinner in the newly renovated wing of the Foundation Center, once an abandoned library, now turned into a modern training space for women navigating legal and corporate injustices. The room was full of warm light, soft jazz, and quiet conversation. Photographs of real cases the Foundation had fought adorned the walls. Whistleblowers, mothers, undocumented workers, all with new beginnings carved by justice. When it came time to speak, Seraphina stepped onto the small stage. The crowd hushed. She wore a dark, emerald gown, her curls pulled back, her voice steady. "Thank you for being here tonight. For years, I feared my name because it reminded me of a version of myself I thought I had lost. The girl who questioned power, who loved too deeply, who vanished." She paused, her hand gripping the edges of the podium. "I learned something important. Names can be stolen, erased, even buried, but when spoken with truth, they rise. And today, I teach my daughter to say mine proudly, not because of what I survived, but because of who I chose to become." A standing ovation followed, but Seraphina's eyes sought only 2 faces in the crowd. Clara, wide-eyed and clapping like her hands were on fire, and Elise, glassy eyes, mouthing the words, "That's my wife." After the dinner, Julian found her outside in the garden, beneath the same tree where he had proposed both times. The evening breeze carried the scent of lavender and salt water. Clara knelt in the dirt beside them, carefully patting soil around the base of a young sapling. "What are you planting?" Seraphina asked, crouching beside her. "A tree for you," Clara answered, "like we do for people who do big things." Julian knelt too, pulling a small bronze plaque from his coat pocket. He handed it to Seraphina. She read the inscription slowly. Mama, who came back stronger. Tears gathered behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not this time. Not from pain, but from power. Julian wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. "Seraphina Maria Blackwell," he whispered. "That name sounds like home." She leaned into him, closing her eyes for a long breath. "Because I chose it this time," she said softly, "and I'm never disappearing again." The next morning, Clara bounded into the Foundation Center's foyer, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her arms full of flyers. "You have even said I could help pass these out at school," she exclaimed, handing one to Seraphina. It read, "Youth Voices Against Injustice, a workshop for young advocates." Seraphina crouched down to Clara's level, brushing a curl from her daughter's cheek. "You're not just helping, you're leading." Clara grinned. Like you. Julian appeared at the doorway, keys in hand. Ready for drop-off, Clara? Clara nodded and kissed Seraphina's cheek. See you at dinner, Mama. I'll tell everyone your full name today. As they walked off, Seraphina stood at the glass window of the center and watched them disappear around the curve of the drive. Her reflection hovered faintly against the backdrop of a world she'd never thought she'd reclaim. The girl who once fled through back alleys now stood at the head of a national foundation. Inside, her office walls were lined with framed letters from women the center had helped. Some in Spanish, others in broken English, all heartfelt. One read, "Because of you, I faced my boss and said no. I found my voice." Another, "You didn't just survive, you lit a path." That afternoon, Seraphina hosted a strategy session with her staff. They brainstormed plans for expanding the foundation into 3 new cities. She listened, contributed, and then surprised them by suggesting a new initiative, a legal mentorship program named after Clara. Because the next generation deserves to grow up knowing they can lead too. After the meeting, she returned to her desk to find a small envelope. The handwriting was Julian's. Inside was a short note. "I still write to you sometimes, even though you're here, because loving you always gave me words." Beneath the note was a faded photo, both of them seen in years. Their first wedding day, she in a lace dress, him in a blue tie, laughing, their foreheads pressed together. The back of the photo still bore the vows he'd written. "Wherever you are, I will find you, not just once, but again and again." She held the picture against her chest, then placed it on the desk beside a newer photo, this one taken weeks ago. All 3 of them under the garden tree, Clara perched on Julian's shoulders, everyone laughing. That night, as golden lanterns lit the walkways of their estate, Clara asked if they could visit the tree before bed. They all walked out together, barefoot in the grass, guided by the soft rustle of sea breeze and memory. Clara placed her hand on the plaque again and whispered, "This is my favorite place." Julian looked at Seraphina. "You built something real here." "Oh, to you," she replied, "not just this home, but something inside me. You helped me believe I could return as more than who I was." He took her hand. "You didn't return, you rose." Clara stretched her arms out dramatically. "Can we all just agree we're the coolest family ever?" They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from healing, not pretending, the kind that echoed into the night without fear. As the stars broke open above them, Seraphina looked at the plaque one more time. Not with sorrow, not with regret, but with peace. "Seraphina Maria Blackwell," Julian said again, letting the name roll off his tongue like a vow renewed. She nodded slowly, the wind carrying her reply like a promise etched in stone. "You. That's who I am. And this time, I wrote the ending myself."